This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the MSI Prestige 15. A little something different from MSI. This is meant to be a cross between an Ultrabook and a mobile workstation. This is not particularly a gaming laptop. And as such, finally, they're actually doing a unique design for this product. Before, with the older PS series of sort of for creative laptops we saw, they took a stealth, basically slapped it with some silvery white paint and called it for creatives instead. So now we get an original design from them. It's all aluminum, but you know, with MSI, they try to make it as light as possible, and they certainly do succeed. It is light, it is thin, but you've got a little bit of flex on it. So if you like that really rock solid Dell XPS 15 kind of feeling, you're not going to get it here, but it's pretty light. So inside, Intel 10th generation 6-core i7. Aha, this is the new Comet Lake 10th generation. This is just the most confusing generation release ever for Intel, because we have the new Ice Lake CPUs that we reviewed in several Ultrabooks, and those are new 10 nanometer parts. This is 14 nanometer, which means this is basically your Skylake architecture carried over into Whiskey Lake, and now we've got in Comet Lake. So basically you got a Whiskey Lake CPU, but you throw in 2 more cores for 6 cores, so you do get some more performance. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. The other interesting thing is NVIDIA GTX 1650 Max-Q graphics, which is what you'll find in the Dell XPS 15 for 2019, and also the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Extreme, and even the little Razer Blade Stealth 13 that we just reviewed for the end of 2019, the higher end configuration there. So you got some chops here. We're going to look at it now. Another compelling thing about this laptop is that it's available with a 4K IPS wide gamut display covering almost the full Adobe RGB color gamut. So if you're doing content creation, either photos for print or you're doing P3 for cinematic kind of stuff, sRGB is still really king on the web for YouTube, by the way. Anyway, they've got you covered literally in terms of gamut. It's also a matte non-touch display, so no glare, but no touch, but yeah. And that's in the more expensive model, which is the one that we have. We have the top of the line model. It's $1,800. That gets you that 4K display, that Core i7 CPU with 6 cores that I mentioned, and 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, dual channel, and a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. So pretty solid configuration there. If that's too rich for your blood, there is a $1,400 model that has a full HD display instead, 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD. By the way, RAM is upgradable. You can do that yourself if you want. We have 2 RAM slots in here, yay that. And we also have 2 M.2 PCIe NVMe SSD slots. So expandable in the way you'd expect from either a mobile workstation or a gaming laptop. That's nice. Now when we're talking about those prices, this is not exactly inexpensive, is it? Sure, compared to a Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Extreme, unless they're having great sales, it sure is cheaper. When you compare it to the Dell XPS 15, which is, Dell's always having sales, not so much in terms of less expensive, but a bit. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So we have the Intel 10th Gen 15 watt 6-core CPU here. So how did they do that, keeping it at 15 watts, but adding more cores? Well, they basically capped the turbo boost a bit lower, but still you're getting more cores doing the work. So it does perform better. You can get about 20%, sometimes even more, performance improvement over an Intel Whiskey Lake 4-core Ultrabook, not mobile workstation or gaming laptop CPU there. That's nice. But when you're talking about the XPS 15 or that ThinkPad, or if you're considering even a gaming laptop because you need horsepower in that budget and you're okay with gaming laptop looks, those 45-watt 6-core CPUs are still about 40% faster. So you are making a compromise here. So this product is really for those of you who are doing photo editing on the go and some video editing on the go, even, 4K video editing, and you don't want all the weight and you want a bit better battery life. So this is part of Intel's Project Athena thing, where you can have a performant laptop that doesn't have horrible battery life and won't break your back either. That said, a lot of you are value-minded, and 2 things we pay for often when we buy a laptop: number 1, performance, and number 2, build quality, looks, that sort of thing. And I know there's also the display sneaking in as a number 3. So the performance gap does hurt a little bit, but for some of you, you don't need all that super-duper horsepower. And to be fair, testing it for things like Premiere Pro, it holds its own. It does okay. The export times won't be as fast as a Dell XPS 15, but they're still a lot faster than an Ultrabook and much more tolerable. And that NVIDIA GTX 1650 really does help compared to using just a regular Ultrabook with integrated graphics. If you're doing something like gaming, I use Shadow of the Tomb Raider because I used that recently for the Razer Blade Stealth 13, which has the same GTX 1650 in it, but a regular Ice Lake CPU instead to compare it. And I did get a bit smoother gameplay and a bit better frame rates here. So that better CPU, the 6 cores versus 4, certainly does help here. And also MSI has different performance profiles. And balanced, you know, performance is better than certainly a Whiskey Lake Ultrabook, but not amazing. But then if you put it in performance mode, it gives the CPU 25 watts for as much as it can use it before it thermal throttles, and that really is a significant boost in performance there. So it doesn't play Shadow of the Tomb Raider like even an entry-level gaming laptop with that same GPU and a 6-core Intel 9th Gen 45-watt CPU, but it's getting there. Speaking of thermal throttling, the cores do get hot on this. You might think that only 45-watt laptops get that hot. Well, Ultrabooks can too, especially when you're cramming that much performance and giving it 25 watts at times to go ahead and try to boost as much as possible. So the core temperatures in this for doing heavy-duty content creation kinds of things, like Premiere Pro, for example, or Blender, the core temperatures will go into the 90s centigrade. That's pretty toasty, so there's that. And we do see some thermal throttling there. It's interesting when playing games, though, because the GPU is called into play so much there. Just like the Razer Blade Stealth 13, the core temperatures of the CPUs actually are much more chill, in the 80s, even the low 80s, because it's giving more of the thermal headroom and the wattage to the GPU instead. Interesting that. So what about the other parts of content creation where you actually care about things like the keyboard and the trackpad and the ports and all that sort of thing? The keyboard on this is quite pleasant. It reminds me of MSI's SteelSeries keyboards. It actually has some cush. It has some travel. I like it. Unless you're used to those really abrupt and harsh ultra-low travel keyboards, then you might not be so thrilled, but this is quite nice. And it's backlit in white because this is not a gaming laptop, remember that. And we have a Microsoft Precision trackpad, thank God, because MSI's non-precision trackpads are typically maddeningly annoying. This one's good. I like it. Ports on this are pretty decent, not amazing. We have USB-A, we have 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, 40 gigabit per second. That's always nice. And we have an HDMI port, but MSI says it's capped at 4K at 30 hertz or 30 frames per second refresh rate, which means it's an older HDMI standard, which is a little disappointing for something that's supposed to be for content creators. You'd like to see a little bit more there. And we have a headphone jack, and we have a micro SD card slot, a little nod to creators there. The display on this is quite nice, 15.6-inch IPS, and is fairly color accurate. Now, MSI has a bunch of different color profiles, and we've seen these on their gaming laptops, and those color profiles were sometimes a little bit unusual, not exactly accurate. Now, we ran our tests with the Adobe RGB preset on it for our colorimeter testing of color gamut and brightness and all that sort of thing. Brightness is not affected by which color profile you choose anyway, very much. But so you might get a little bit better in terms of your color accuracy and color gamut representation if you switch profiles to match whatever you're testing. Anyway, it's pretty good stuff, and it is pretty color accurate. We didn't see 100% of Adobe RGB, but when you hit the 90s, that's plenty good enough to make any professional photographer feel pretty happy. Not to mention video editors too, and any kind of content creator. So they did a nice job with the display. Speakers on this, we have stereo 2-watt speakers, and they're okay. They're average. They're not multimedia woohoo kind of experience thing. Happily, the fans will not drown you out. The fans are very rarely audible. They're always spinning a little bit, but you usually won't hear them. If you're pushing it very hard, if you are playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider or exporting 4K video, they'll come on, but nothing that's going to drown out the speaker audio, which is a good thing. So how about battery life? One of the points of having this lower power CPU is better battery life, and indeed that's true. We have an 82 watt-hour battery, which also helps. That's a good capacity battery here. And by the way, it's a USB-C based 100-watt charger, which is a maximum that USB-C supports for charging. Same charging amount that we saw in the Stealth 13 with the same GPU, by the way. Anyway, battery life on this, if you're doing productivity and light use work, is actually quite good. We managed to get about 8 hours with the display set at 200 nits of brightness. That's pretty good. That's a lot better than you'll see for most mobile workstations or gaming laptops. Obviously, if you're pushing it harder, if you're doing a Blender render with it unplugged or editing in Premiere or trying to play a game, you're going to get shorter run times, but generally you want to plug it in to get the best performance anyway when you're doing those sorts of things. But if you do, for example, I was doing a lot of Photoshop and some Premiere, then you can cut it down to 5 hours of battery life, which actually for that kind of heavy use case isn't bad at all. And looking at the bottom cover, not the prettiest thing we've seen, not that the bottoms of laptops are that pretty, but you know MSI, they're a little aesthetically challenged. We got plenty of ventilation here. We have very visible Phillips head screws, which you unscrew to remove the aluminum bottom. There is the factory seal tape they always put here. They say that's for your protection, and in the United States it won't void your warranty, they say, if you remove that, as long as you don't break the laptop. Anyway, you're going to have to bust through that sticker right there to remove the last Phillips head screw. Take off our bottom cover, which is like so on the inside. And there are lovely serviceable internals, from our big battery right here to 2 RAM slots, so a maximum of 64 gigs of DDR4 RAMs possible. Our M.2 NVMe SSD right there, and you've got a second slot available if you want to put a second drive in. And ours had a fast Samsung drive inside. There's our socketed Intel Wi-Fi AX200 card, so that's Wi-Fi 6 on board. Good that. And our down-firing small speakers, no wonder they don't sound super impressive, are beside the battery facing downward, which is pretty traditional laptop architecture. The 2 fans here, one much larger than the other, no kidding, and are fairly small heat sinks. This might explain why the temperatures are not so amazingly fantastic on this. The GPU temperatures are typically not so bad, but the CPU gets toasty, like I said, if you're pushing it hard. And our little heat pipes, we have one that is not shared, which is always a good idea, so there's not so much heat pollution going on. Yay. So that's the MSI Prestige 15, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it's also available in a 14-inch size, which is an interesting model that actually does compete with that in Razer Blade Stealth 13 that I've been mentioning. 2.84 pounds, it's very light, and pretty much the same specs, the same internals that you have on this. So if you're looking for something even smaller and around the same pricing as well, it is available in a 14-inch. But anyway, the 15-inch, well, it's that new generation of laptops. Like I said, this is about thinness, about not making too much noise, about better battery life, and not being the most performance-oriented 15-inch, almost mobile workstation on the block, but it has a lot of the graphics to get you some gaming on the go, to help you do your Premiere, your Blender, and all that sort of stuff without having something that is a real heavy brick. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit that notification bell.